This is Lake Como, a stunning glacial lake at the foot of the Alps in northern Italy. It's famous for its pristine blue water with imposing mountain backdrops and is dotted by dozens of tiny picturesque villages. Spoiler alert, I'm going to be biking here. Stick around and find out what it's like to ride to Lake Como from Milan and what cycling in this scenic part of Europe is like. It was early September, and I found myself in Milan with a few days to spare. I had just completed an incredible ride through the Alps with Sushida. Check out that video if you want to see some amazing scenery. My friend Bobby was coming to Italy in a few days, but I wanted to take full advantage of the time before then and spend a few days cycling somewhere nice. There were plenty of great options in northern Italy, but the mountains of the Alps were still on my mind, so I packed up my bike and headed north. Getting out of big cities is often a huge pain, so I expected the worst riding out of downtown Milan. In practice though, it wasn't too bad with mostly smaller streets and occasional short bike lanes leading out past the suburban sprawl of Italy's second largest city. A few miles into my ride, I entered a large park area called Parco delle Groane. It was a long wooded area passing small streams, farms, and the occasional historical site. The park contains over 100 combined kilometers of trails, and I was genuinely surprised how long I was able to ride it for on my way to the lake. The trail passed on the outskirts of a few very small towns. I made the big mistake I was warned about and tried to get lunch in the late afternoon. Every place I tried was either shut or prepping for dinner. Luckily, kebab shops are never closed, and I got some sustenance before carrying on. I knew the area I was riding in was very fancy and expensive. I needed to find some budget accommodations relatively nearby, so I settled for a hotel in a town on the way called Cantu. It was less than 10 miles from Lake Como and one of the busier towns I passed. There was a nice central square in town with lots of restaurants and bars. In the distance, I could see some immense mountain peaks on the horizon. In the morning, I completed the trip and arrived in the town of Como. My first impressions were that it was attractive but way too busy with fancy dressed tourists and expensive shops all over the place. It didn't seem like the kind of place I would enjoy for too long, and I was kind of glad I didn't spend the night there. After grabbing a bite, I rode on along the eastern shore of the lake. There was one main road that was unfortunately pretty busy with car traffic and motorcycles. Not the most relaxing ride, but every once in a while there was a parallel road that passed through a small town and provided a much-needed break from the traffic and noise. I did a fair bit of climbing and took in some wonderful views of the water in nearby towns. The views of the lake reminded me of another trip I took with Sushida about a year ago to another famous lake. It was called Lake Atitlan in the Central American country of Guatemala. I remember when I was doing research for that trip, I came across comparisons between Atitlan and Como, including this famous quote by Aldous Huxley. I want to establish whether or not they are truly similar, so I want to play a little game. I'll show a few short clips, and I want you to guess if the footage is from Lake Como or Lake Atitlan. I'll reveal the answers at the end. Okay, so here goes. Clip number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. And finally, clip number 6. Pause the video now if you still want more time to guess before I reveal the answers. Okay, ready? Clips number 2 and 6 are the only ones from Lake Como. The rest are from Lake Atitlan. Leave a note in the comments if you got them right or wrong, and also if you've been to one of them, both of them, or neither of them. I'll leave a link to my Guatemala video if you want to know more about Lake Atitlan and also hiking some incredible volcanoes. Back on the eastern shore of the lake, I took lots of photos and footage of a beautiful lakeside village in the late afternoon sun. It was called Torno, and I decided to check it out a little closer. I had to walk my bike down a huge staircase towards the water. The town was pretty much pedestrian only, with lots of alleys and staircases leading all around. There was a huge wedding party taking their golden hour photos in the idyllic setting. I figured I'd relax a bit in town and return to Como by boat. The ferry operator on site confirmed that there was enough room for my bike on the boat, and I loaded it on and headed back. There were only a few stops on the way back to Como, and I arrived just as the sun was setting. The most affordable place I could find for the night nearby was a little ways outside of town, and I rode a few more miles to wrap up my day. The hotel I stayed in was a rather cheap but cheerful option, a stone's throw from the border with Switzerland. It was tucked in an alley next to a busy rail station, but it was affordable and the owner was very nice. It may not be so novel in Europe, but crossing borders so easily is not an experience we get too often in North America, so I took advantage of my opportunity and rode across in the morning. On the other side of a small, uneventful border crossing was the Swiss town of Chiasso. I got a quick coffee and pastry here, mostly because I wanted to get my hands on some Swiss francs, especially the huge 5-franc coin, which is currently worth more than $5. The town was very subdued, and I didn't linger long, but I did take some photos of the town square and this rather strange building. Turns out this is some kind of fancy parking garage. I continued onward back to the lake, but decided to ride the western coast this time. It was a very busy morning with tourists all along the waterfront. There were lots of police out and about because some sort of dignitary was having a meeting at one of the fancy villas. The architecture along the route was quite beautiful. There were many colorful villas overlooking the lake. Many people come here to relax, so I tried to follow suit and rode at a very leisurely pace with plenty of stops. The road on this side of the lake, as on the other coast, was full of traffic sharing the road alongside me. It made the experience a little less serene than I would have hoped, but the views were getting more and more impressive the further north I got. The small green hills were turning into huge jagged mountains in the distance. Even though I traveled much further than the previous day, I was still barely halfway up the lake. Even so, it would take quite a bit longer than the day before to return to Como. I got some advice on which boat to take and tied my ride to it. The last town I made it to was called Tremezzo, which had a long, beautiful path along the lake with a large park to linger in and take in all the views. When the time came, I hopped on the ferry, and they gave my bike a front row view as we headed back towards Como. The ride was quite a bit longer this time, but it was nice to get to see a few more villages from the water. Once back on the shore, I went over to the train station and booked a ticket back to Milan. I sang the praises of Italy's public transportation in my previous video, but it's worth repeating that the rail system is super bike-friendly. Trains run back and forth from Milan to Como many times a day and have these folding racks for bikes. If I recall correctly, the ticket was a total of €5.50 for a trip that was just under an hour. In a small way, what I was sort of trying to do with this trip is act like I do back home. In New York, I have lots of experience taking bikes on commuter rail, and I regularly show up to a train station 5 minutes before it leaves and jump on. I didn't plan much of this short trip and decided mostly to wing it. I did book the hotels a day ahead of time because I didn't want to get stuck paying €300 for some overpriced swanky place. The boats were also very easy to use, and all the staff at the ports were helpful when I turned to them for assistance. I could certainly have seen much more of the lake than I did, but I wanted to kind of soak in the views and embrace the slower pace of life that this region is famous for. Overall, I think I would rate the riding about a 6.5 out of 10. It was gorgeous almost everywhere, but the traffic was incessant. Drivers were mostly respectful, but I would much rather ride on some sort of dedicated path, or at least a road shoulder to enjoy the views in relative peace. Besides hotels, food was also very pricey. Many places charge a cover just to sit down, but the food I had was very good and the setting was well worth it. Let me know if you've ridden in this region and what routes you'd recommend. I definitely heard about some more interesting trails on the Swiss side and hope to get off the busy road a little more if I do end up back in this region again. My return to Milan marked the end of this tiny tour, but it was also the start of another adventure. Here's a sneak preview, but stay tuned for much more. See if you can guess the destination. I've also been working on my website and photo portfolio, so check that out as well. I'll eventually add some of my Como photos, but you can see the Slovenia ones for now. Drop a note in the comments, and thanks again for watching.